Right. Lesson 225 here in the workbook follows on lesson 224. I know, right? Crazy, crazy that way. So lesson 224, as we saw in the last video, is very succinct. These are all very succinct lessons right now at this point. And it's God is my Father and he loves his Son. That was 224. So lesson 225, God is my Father and his Son loves him. God is my Father and his Son loves him. One following the other. Each statement a statement of truth. And, well, you're seeing this on a different day. So perhaps you find yourself in a different place than when you saw lesson 224. Perhaps today you're finding yourself more receptive to this idea, perhaps more resistant, and maybe it's exactly the same as it was the last video. Whenever you saw it, whether it was yesterday or whether you're going through this a day at a time, really doesn't make any difference, does it? Isn't that fun? Yeah. I mean, clearly you've reached lesson 225 in the workbook, so a commitment on your part clearly exists, and something has happened in your life and experience that has kept you moving forward. In other words, you've seen without question and felt a difference in the way that you perceive everything. Yourself, the world, everyone in it, everything. To put it in broad spiritual terms, you've experienced a shift. Perhaps subtle, perhaps smack you in the face, blatant. Yeah. These two lessons, lessons 224 and lesson 225, have to do with oneness. They have to do with, of course, absolute truth, God, unity, and love. And love. So let's take a moment and remind ourselves. The Course tells us all expressions of love are maximal. It's what God is. It's what God has given himself, itself. We say in the world, and we know intuitively, that you cannot give what you don't have. God, being love, gives love. And in fact, that's it. What else is there? Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. That, again, is the summary of A Course in Miracles from the very beginning of the text. So I hope that in this practice, and I trust that you have felt this to some degree, is that you have cultivated or are actively cultivating a burning desire. Yeah, a longing to experience truth for yourself. In certain spiritual traditions, you may refer to this, people do, as an urgency. Not an urgency like you have to go to the bathroom, I mean, I'm not talking that kind of urgency, but the urgency of practice, the desire to move beyond ego clinging, the desire to leave suffering to the side and no longer experience it. Have you cultivated that desire? And are you nurturing that? This is good. It's a sense of heightened willingness, isn't it? The Course asks us for a little willingness. That's what we supply. The Holy Spirit does the rest, the removal of guilt, unconscious guilt. We simply show up and ask him, it, her, them, pronoun doesn't make any difference, to enter. We ask the Holy Spirit to take charge. In so doing, we're leaving our ego behind. This is why it can feel so difficult. It's why it can feel like you're giving up everything to the ego. In fact, the ego believes that you are giving up everything. I mean, the ego would have you convinced that to surrender and give up and allow the Holy Spirit to direct everything, your entire life, the ego equates that with death and will stop at nothing to convince you of this. This may start with little diversions, little distractions, interrupting a meditation or a loving thought to go back to somebody's Twitter feed, for example, may start with something that looks benign, but after a certain point, the ego can no longer pretend that it's your friend. It's unmasked, completely unmasked. And you may have reached that point where it's no longer your friend and it doesn't resort to distractions, little tactics like pulling your attention away from God, pulling your attention away from quiet contemplation. You may experience it flat out yelling at you like a frontal and verbal assault. All of these things are possible on the spiritual path. Now, if you're experiencing that frontal assault, you know you're doing the right thing. You know you're on the path. When the ego no longer can pretend it's your friend, it's on the run, so to speak. It doesn't exist, so there's no place for it to run. And my hope for you is that today you take these words to heart. These two lessons, lessons 224 and lesson 225, are all about love. So in the midst of your daily life, to the extent that you can remember, even for a split second, to remind yourself that God is love. You're one with God. You're love. It's all there is. And to the extent that you find the summary of A Course in Miracles helpful, nothing real can be threatened. Love can't be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. The ego doesn't exist. Herein lies the peace of God. So I invite you to take this idea and run with it, so to speak. I mean, there's no place to run, right? Just sit and be with it wherever you are. And as always, a reminder that no doubt you've at lesson 225 found ways of practicing these workbook ideas that work for you, that work with your schedule, that work with your life, however busy you may find yourself. I mean, maybe you're not. So, however you incorporate this idea into your life, my hope is that you allow love to simply be, to show up in your experience, to move through you as you extend it, through your own loving speech, your thoughts, your gestures, through your forgiveness. So when people say, hey, it's all about love, well, of course it is. There is nothing else. All right. Thanks for joining.